This is the lecture for Chapter 7, The Development of Cognitive Processes. This is really looking at the information processing theory. So we want to work to understand the model of memory, understand processing strategies, and understand how these theories are applied to education. We won't get time to talk about how metacognition develops, but it's something that you should pay attention to in the reading. There are lots of little activities that go along with this lecture, and even though you're viewing at home and not live in class, I would encourage you to try some of those out. So the memory span test, writing with your opposite hand, and the long-term memory test. They're fun and they help demonstrate some of the concepts that we're talking about here in the chapter. Before we begin with the video lecture, I want to briefly describe what information processing theory is. So information processing theory is the specific way in which people mentally acquire, interpret, and remember information. It's really a model for the memory system. It all begins with input from the environment, which provides the raw material for cognitive processing. So it all starts with sensation and perception. There are then 4 parts to the information processing theory, or the model of memory. The first is the sensory register, the second is the working memory, and the third is the long-term memory. Finally, the central executive oversees the flow of all of the information within those 3 pieces. Now, I like to think of a computer analogy to help me when I'm thinking about information processing theory. In the computer analogy, you can think of the sensory register as typing to get information into your computer. So you type on the keys and the information appears on your screen. It's very quick, it only holds information briefly, and it's just getting the information in. The next piece is the working memory. This is active processing of small amounts of information. In the computer analogy, I like to think of the way that the computers are processing information live. So you used to be able to hear computers when they were actually thinking, and I know I'm dating myself a little bit here with that, but you could hear the fan going and you could hear funny noises that came from your machine as the machine was working. So our processes in our cognitive system are the same. It's when we're actively working on pieces of information. The final piece is the long-term memory, and this is where you hold knowledge for a long time. So we save our memories. In the computer, you hit save and you can save all of the files that you're working on. So it's a good analogy here for the information processing theory to think about a computer system. The last piece is that central executive overseeing the flow of all the information. This is where metacognition falls, and we'll talk about this very briefly at the end of the lecture, but it's really important that you spend some time looking at this in the reading because we don't spend a lot of time talking about it together. Now the lecture is going to pick up describing the working memory and that analogy with the computer processing. Strange like noise, and it's running really loud, and then the fan turns on. Right? It was that huge tower. Yeah, it heated up your feet too. So that's your working memory, when you can actually hear the computer thinking. Now I tend to think of it as the circle of death on my Mac that just spins. It doesn't let me do anything. It's thinking. The computer's thinking. So then if you want to store information later on, what do you guys do with your computers? Hit save. Yeah. And I also put it in Dropbox, so it's there forever. Yeah. So put it on the internet to save it as well. But I hit save. That's the process of then working it into your long-term memory. So moving it from active processing, when you can hear the computer thinking, to the long-term memory system. Okay, so you hit save. It's more than just an analogy because theorists for information processing actually create computer, I'm not very technical here with this, but programs that are supposed to think like humans do, computer programs. And they test their information processing theories using the computer programs to try to get computers to think the way that people do.
Artificial intelligence?
Like artificial intelligence, yeah, absolutely. Sure. Will Smith was in a great movie about that. Yeah. So it's more than just an analogy in that this is a way that they do work to test their theory. Okay? So the last piece for the information processing theory is the central executive, and it oversees the flow of the entire system. So initially I used to think of the central executive as a little businessman. That's why I have this guy in the suit here, who used to direct all of the information through the system. So he was the boss. He points what should I attend to, how should I attend to it, should I remember this, what strategy should I use now that I have recognized it as important, and then how can I pull it out of my long-term memory if I want to use it later. That's the central executive. I like to think of him now as Mr. Bates from Downton Abbey, if anybody watches that. Maybe I'm making myself old again.
No, love it.
Yeah, it's great. I know, but it's kind of like an old married woman's TV show.
I've never watched it.
It's fantastic. Yeah, so Mr. Bates is one of the butlers, and he kind of has his hands in everything and directs the flow of information and is kind of like one of the head of the households. But you could just think of a businessman if that works for you. So what we are going to do is cover the whole model of the working memory system in a little bit more detail, and we're going to talk about application as we go. So I am handing you out a graphic organizer here. Can anybody determine or share with the class why this type of a tool might be useful for your learning? Why would this be something that I would give to you?
Because we've seen this chart in the book, and it
Yeah.
might trigger our memory.
Yeah, so that's an awesome point. It's in the book, it's in the active reading questions, so now you're revisiting it, right? You're rehearsing it, essentially. So hopefully it will trigger your memory.
It's in your
What else is it a tool for?
It's helping you organize information and focus on what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an organizational tool. A lot of our graphic organizers do just that. It lets us see the information presented visually so that we can organize it so that we can remember it better later on. Okay? So you can use this one however you want. Take notes on it today. Use it as a quiz to prepare for your midterm or cumulative opportunity. Make a paper airplane. It's all the same. Yes?
On our measure of opportunity, would we have anything like this to fill in?
I don't know. That would be pretty cool though, wouldn't it?
No.
Initially, no, but Ray did an extensive review of my previous midterm exam and suggested something like this, so it's something I'm thinking about.
It's all my fault. Is it going to have the legend?
I have a question.
I don't
to
know.
ask about
Sure,
the quiz.
come on.
It has to do with the long-term memory.
Sure.
So one of the questions was,
If it's, I think I know which one it is, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of questions on that. So can we wait till long-term memory?
yeah,
Okay. Raise your
Yeah.
hand again when we get to long-term memory.
Okay.
And we'll talk about it.
okay.
All right. Robert has the same question, I think. Okay, so let's start though with the sensory memory, or sensory register, also called sensory memory. So here we have a very small capacity. It's instantaneous, and remember, it's just getting the information into the system. So you're not holding it here for very long. You're just interpreting the information as it's coming in. So we have what's called a visuospatial sketchpad. That's not important for you to write down. It's just your imagery. And then we have a phonological loop. Those are the things that you hear. And that's what is your initial register of information coming into the system. Okay? So environmental input, first thing it hits is the sensory register. And if we attend to it, if we pay attention, we can then move it into the working memory. If we do not pay attention to it, what happens? We lose it. It is gone. It is like it never existed. We are bombarded by information all of the time. We cannot attend to everything. There's too much that's coming in all at once for us to attend to. So I want you guys to pay attention for 1 second to your feet and wiggle your toes inside of your shoes and feel how they feel maybe in your socks. Okay? That feeling of your toes inside of your shoes and your socks that was always happening. Your feet were touching your socks, your toes were touching your socks and your shoes this whole time. But did you feel it until I told you to pay attention to it? No, hopefully not, unless you have some kind of athlete's foot or something. I didn't really consider that.
Really sweaty feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before I drew your attention to it, you were not thinking about it. You weren't attending to it. But what I've done is I've drawn your attention to it, so I've pulled it out of just this sensory register and moved it into your working memory. There are things coming at us all the time. This is why attention is critical for learning. We have to attend to it to move it into the next process. Okay? So the next stage here, the next step in the model, is our working memory. So remember, this one is quick, instantaneous. We're just getting the information in. Attend to it, we'll move it into our working memory system. Our working memory is also limited in its duration. About 2 to 3 minutes, we can hold things. You can hold it longer if you are actively working on holding it or processing it. And it's limited in its capacity. So there's not a whole lot of information that we can hold at any given time in our working memory. So limited in duration and limited in its capacity. So I would like us to do a quick little memory span test. Okay, so play along with me. It's going to be a ready recall. So I'm going to say ready, and then I'm going to list off some numbers, and then I'll say recall, and I want you to write the numbers down in that order. Okay? So it's a memory span test. All right, ready? 9, 7, 5, 4, recall. Ready? 6, 8, 2, 5, 9, recall. Ready? 9, 1, 3, 8, 2, 5, recall. Ready? 5, 9, 6, 3, 8, 2, 7, recall. Ready? 8, 6, 9, 5, 1, 3, 7, 2, recall. Ready? 7, 1, 9, 3, 8, 4, 2, 7, 6, recall.
Remember any of them now.
One more. Ready? 5, 6, 2, 1, 7, 9, 5, 4, 3, 1, recall. All right, so that is a typical memory span test. There are ones that are much more difficult than that, and there are ones that use things other than numbers. Okay, but we can use this one as a simple example of a way of testing our working memory. So here are the answers. What I want you to do is find the row that you were correct in. So let's say you got this one correct, good, this one correct, this one correct, this one correct. This is where you would stop. Okay, or maybe it's further down or further up. So the first one has 4 pieces of information in it. 9, 7, 5, 4. Okay. Was this for anybody the best that you did? Yeah, that's okay. All right, so 9, 7, 5, 4. How about 6, 8, 2, 5, 9? So that's 5 pieces of information. Yeah, I was here too. Oh, so there's more of these? Okay, so I'm going to go 4 because I was in that group too when I first did this. All right, how about 6 pieces of information, the third line? 2, 3, 5 of you?
So you're saying that's the last one you got right, though, right?
Yeah, like that's your best score. Okay. So 7 pieces of information. So now we're on this 4th line of community. 1, 2. How about 8 pieces of information? What was yours?
I missed like 2 rows, but then I got one, like one of the last one.
So like maybe you missed this here, but then you did okay here.
Yeah.
Tell me the last one that you did. Well, not right now, but once I get to it. Anybody for 8? One. How about 9? 2. How about the last one is 10 pieces of information? Okay, so a typical memory span test for adults gives us about 7 pieces of information on average that we remember as adults. So you can see that our numbers they're a little bit less than 7, so more people had 6, but we have a few people up here that would balance that out just a little bit. So we're pretty much right on here for an average for 7 for a memory span. What did you do to help you learn this information? Picture the numbers in your head, so use imagery. Sure.
I took 3 of the numbers and count, like I went, the first 3 I put together, and then the next 3 I put together, and then the last.
Yeah, so like for this one, 913, 825. So she grouped them. Grouping, yeah.
I was like saying as you went, I would like say the 2 numbers together in my head, like over and over.
So rehearsal.
Right.
Yeah, so 9, 9, 9, 7, 9, 7, 9, 7, 5, 9, 7, 5, 9, 7, 5, 4. Anybody else do that? Yeah. Well, how do you think, what do you think that little kids do when they do rehearsal? They rehearse. It's just a little bit different.
They say it out loud.
A lot of times they say it out loud, which would be very Gotskian, right? But what does it sound like? Is it the 9, 9, 7, 9, 7, 5? It's not.
However you say it to them.
It's how, yep, and it starts with that 1 that they just repeat that. So 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. So they're repeating, but their cognitive strategy isn't mature enough to say, oh, I should probably repeat the previous information as well so I can remember the whole string. Okay. Did anybody do anything else to help them remember here?
Well, towards the end, I don't know if this counts, but like I remembered like the first 3 and the last 3, but I couldn't remember the middle.
Yeah, so there is a priming effect for beginning and end of information. So that's just something our normal system will do. Yeah. Did anybody see any numbers in here that they've seen before?
719.
Huh?
719.
719.
It's an area code.
Yeah, an area code that people are familiar with. So you see the 719 and then you can kind of forget that and concentrate on the rest. That is elaboration. That's using prior knowledge to help you learn new information. Okay, that's the best cognitive strategy that we have. So when we look at our working memory span, we know that it's limited. You can only hold a certain amount. If it was unlimited, we would all be here. All of us would have 10 pieces of information. But it's limited. And it's only for a little bit of time. So if I asked you now to recall the 4 digits in the middle, you would not be able to do that. that would be difficult for you. You're not actively processing it anymore. Well, it's up there, so you could just read it, but let's say it would. So limited in capacity, and it does increase with age. When we look at the little ones, you'll see there the memory span for a 2.5-year-old is about 2 items. We're considering each of these numbers here to be one piece of information. So 9754, 4 items. Unless you're tests and you group them. So 9754, 2 pieces of information. That's one of the reasons why grouping or an organizational strategy can help you learn information. But the little guys, about 2 pieces of information in their working memory at a given time. For 7-year-olds, it's about 4 to 5 pieces of information. In adults, we say 7 plus or minus 2. So we have a little bit of individual differences that exist there in that processing. But about 7 pieces of information. So the amount is dependent on our use of cognitive strategies, those things that we just talked about, and we'll look at those cognitive strategies again here in just a minute. Okay? The other thing that's important for our working memory is the use of automatic processes. So cognitive strategies and automatic processes. So there are certain things that we do as adults that are automatic, that we do not have to think about. And that frees up space in our working memory so that we can process other things. Children are still actively working on some of the things. No. They're still they have to use some of their cognitive energy, effort, working memory space for things that we take for granted that are automatic. Okay? We're going to come back to that in just a second. The central executive is another piece that's important here. Remember the little businessman. Increasingly taking charge as children age. Okay. So we're going to continue and we're going to apply working memory to the classroom. But what I want you to do as I push forward here is switch hands. So if you are a righty, I need you to write with your left hand. If you are a lefty, I need you to write with your right. And if you are good at typing back there, I need you to start to go back to the initial. Yeah, oh, you still do that?
How do you do that? How do you
Yeah,
go
you
backwards?
gotta go to the pointing. Okay. So let's talk briefly.
watching.
Play along with me here
Can you
about
talk slower?
how.
I mean, if you're going to handicap us.
About how working memory applies to the classroom. So things to keep in mind when you're designing lessons. The first thing is that you need to recognize the working memory span of your students. Okay, developmentally appropriate practice here. You need to give them time to process that material, to think about it, to work on it. You need to limit the big ideas in the lesson. We throw a lot of information at children when they can only handle 3 or 4 pieces at a time. You also need to recognize that your learning disabled students are going to have less processing speed. We have courses in education that will help you to not only recognize this, but then teach children who have some of these disabilities. Now, this is super important, so star it and get ready for it, because it's definitely going to be on your upcoming exam. Yeah, yes you do. So understand and promote the cognitive strategies that you need to then move the information from the working memory into the long-term memory. Just like attention is critical, you're not going to get it into long-term memory without those cognitive strategies. And there are certain strategies that are better than others. Okay, so this piece right here, moving it into long-term memory, you definitely need to know. So do you want to take a quiz on that?
No.
Should I assess you on your understanding?
I like gave up listening.
Oh, learned helplessness, one of my favorite things that happens to students. I give up. What happened?
You get frustrated because
Yeah, you got
Like, I'm
frustrated.
like you're going fast and I'm like trying to like type with my 2 fingers and I'm so worried that I can't even catch up and then I'm just like
Sure.
I'm not gonna get it. So I'm just
And I was going fast, but not much faster than I go normally, right? I mean, in reality, that's pretty much my speed. I know you guys have these notes, so. So what did I do in terms of information processing?
You give us too much too fast.
Too much, too fast, but
Took us out of our comfort.
it took you out of your comfort zone.
You distracted us.
It was a distraction, sure, so you couldn't attend to everything. Yeah, you guys are all there, but you're dancing around it just a little bit. Oh, yeah. What's an automatic process that you have as an adult?
Writing.
Writing, or maybe typing. Writing or typing. Do you have to think about how to make the letter A? No. Does a 6-year-old? Yeah. Right? So there are things that we do as adults that are automatic, that do not take up our working memory. We just do them. So they're not constricting the system. They're not taxing the system. But for children, some of those things do. They have to think about things that we don't. And that takes up some of the working memory span, which is already at 4 or 5 pieces. So let's say it's at 5 pieces of information, and then we're having them write the answers down, or share orally with their peers, or do some other task. That grabs another 2 to 3 pieces. They're left with 1 or 2 left that they're actively processing. Right? So recognizing their memory span, recognizing what is automatic and isn't, is going to help you create lessons that aren't overtaxing this system. And this here in working memory, if we go back here, this piece, just like with sensory register or attention, if it's not here, they're not going to learn it. It's not going to get into the system. We're not going to store it later on. So we're building upon here with each of these pieces. So I took you out of your comfort zone. I made you frustrated, right? And took a process that was typically automatic for you and made it non-automatic, put it in your working memory, and then asked you to learn something from me in this slide here. And it was too much. And I've got students that are giving up on it. Okay, so I'm going to cover this again. So we'll walk through this again. The application piece here for the working memory. Recognizing the memory span. It's a big piece here. Recognizing what is taxing the system and what isn't. And making our lessons appropriate to that. Allowing students time to process it. I didn't give you that time. They need time to work on it. You need time to work on it as students. Number 3 is limiting big ideas in lessons. This is something that, as a college instructor, I know firsthand we do not do a good job of in college classes. Me either. And it's something I struggle with all the time. Because there's so much information that we want you to understand, to learn. And we do this with the little kids too. So as much as you can, you want to think, what are the major points? I always ask myself this, once you guys leave, what do I want you to know? If I could pick 2 or 3 things in the whole class that are super important, what are they? And then I try to frame the lesson around those ideas. Learning disabled students will have less processing speed. They might also have less storage space. So it's not only speed of processing, but it's amount that they can process at a given time. And so there are courses in the special education program that can help with this application. Okay. Now this number 5 is the one that I said star is important. Just like attention is critical for learning, our cognitive strategies that we use are critical. Okay. So to get information from the working memory and to store it into the long-term memory so that you can use it later, you need to employ an in-depth cognitive processing strategy. Some of our strategies are better than others, but we've already covered what they are. We have rehearsal, organization, and elaboration. So you've got to use one of these processes to encode the memory, to create the memory, to save it into your computer or your brain. Are we feeling a little bit better about this slide? Questions so far?
I just have a really weird question.
Okay.
So if you have like a photographic or like autographic memory,
Mhm.
how does that?
So there's some research that suggests that that's something that doesn't really exist. There are just people that have more of a visual representation of information than they do verbal, is what it is.
They wouldn't be able to remember more numbers.
They probably would, and there are people that are better at this than other people. Yeah, so you have those individual differences. And this is something that you can practice and get better at. You can train yourself to increase your memory, your working memory span. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here in our chart, we're at number 4. We have the in-depth processing, and that's going to move information over to our long-term memory. So here are those in-depth processing cognitive strategies. This chart is available to you on your lecture outlines. So I'm going to push through it a little bit quick, and we've also talked about it already. Rehearsal, learning by repeating information over and over again. This is probably the most common cognitive strategy that we have if we've got to keep something quickly, but it's not the one that keeps information for the longest amount of time. So it's not our most effective strategy. It's one of the first strategies that children do learn, though. Although, as I demonstrated with how they learn it, it's not mature right from the beginning. So the application here, numerous opportunities to practice. This is what you do in the classroom to get at this cognitive strategy. We let them practice the information. Repetition.
So that way, like when we're younger, we have a lot of spelling tests.
Yeah, it's a drill and practice kind of idea. Sure. Yep. Also, they want that word to be automatic so that you don't have to think about it when you go to write it down. Organization is identifying relationships among pieces of information. So you can use this as an example. This is an organization tool. So scaffolded note-taking, scaffold, Vygotsky, right? Concept maps, categorizing information, all of that is going to be an application if you're working on the organization strategy. Elaboration. Using prior knowledge to embellish on new information and learn it more effectively. This here, this is the one that's going to create the lasting memories. This is where we increase our students' learning, is elaboration. So the research shows that when we use what they know as a starting point and have them build off of that, they're building their scheme, that's what's going to produce the best results. So when we're in here and I say to you, well, who would say this? Or what does this mean from Piaget's theory? We're doing this, and we're also doing this. I want you to build upon the prior knowledge. I want you to elaborate. Elaboration is a key piece here. The last one at the bottom, visual imagery or mnemonics. Any memory aid that you might use to help you. So there are lots of different ones, visual imagery. There are word associations. That's one of my favorites. So if you can remember from chapter 2, I gave you a word association for correlation. Does anyone know what that is? What does correlation mean?
Relationship.
Yes, thank you. You make me so happy. Relationship. That was my word association. Okay, so I like to pair up words together to get at that information later on. Okay. But they can be as silly as games that you use to help remember somebody's name. like lovely Liz. Right? That could help me remember who she is.
So,
All right. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
So like, about the quiz again, really quick.
Yeah, so we're in long-term memory now.
Okay, really quick with that one, like the organization, so the girl was trying to remember everything that was in her locker. And she was just like, my book, my this, my that, and that's organization because she's like organizing them all as something that's
Like
in her locker.
subjects for her class.
Oh.
Yeah, categorizing it.
So she's categorizing it like,
Yeah.
because she said my math book, science book, notebooks, coat, hat, gloves, so she's like organizing it into
Pieces.
like my books and then like,
Sure.
and is that why it's organization?
I would have to look at the question again, but
Okay.
from the explanation you're giving me, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. How about the other long-term memory question?
With the test study,
Yeah.
how is that long-term?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
not
because he didn't get it right.
According
Because he
to
couldn't
the,
remember a week later.
Yeah.
He couldn't remember a week later, but you're just thinking of the word long as having to be lasting. So it can be, but it could go away. Remember we have synaptic pruning, or maybe it's in there and you just can't get it. You forget.
Because if it's any working memory or anything, that's less than maybe.
Yeah, if it was working memory, I would have had to have been actively processing it from the moment I learned it until I dumped it out on the exam. It's in there, it's in there, it's in there, it's in there, like that. Like a constant conversation. He went to sleep. He probably had dinner, had breakfast, got up, went to school, processed all kinds of other things that took up his working memory.
Okay.
And not what was on the test, right? That was in long term.
Okay.
Then he had to pull it out for the exam, put it on the paper, but a week later couldn't get at it again. But it had reached long term. If it hadn't, he would have been in here in this 1 minute of I've got to think about it the whole time. Like my computer that's thinking that I never hit save on. Does that make sense?
but the book's definition, that wasn't the book's definition.
What's in the book set?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I remember, I took it last
Is it
night.
in your working or
It's
your
in my
long-term
working memory.
memory?
I would consider that, yeah, my working memory.
Yeah.
But it was like, it specifically said a real long time.
Well,
More than just.
long-term memory, if we look at the definition, the idea is that it's indefinite. It's forever. It's always in there. So everything that you learn should be there. It's whether or not you can retrieve it. Whether or not you can pull it out. Yeah.
My logic when answering that question was, had he studied, which most people do, right prior to a test, he would have been processing it up until he took the test, dumped the information, thereby never made it into long-term memory.
Yeah.
And when he was quizzed on it next week, he was like,
Yeah, I don't know.
I got nothing.
Sure, I totally understand what you guys are saying.
It's a very craftily worded question.
Tricky?
So here's the definition. Is component of memory that holds knowledge and skills for a relatively long period of time.
Yeah, so do you think like overnight is a long time?
That's
When we think
that's-
about a minute or less?
Yeah, that is.
I hear what you guys are saying, and I'll meet you on this question. I can give everybody points. That's not the important part. The important part is knowing what this is. So are you following me when I say that if it was working, he'd have to be working on it the whole time. You put it in here, then you don't have to be working on it. You can think about dinner and watching TV and sleeping and all of that, and come back to it later. Yeah.
So if it is in long-term, like, go back to this question, like, would he be able to, if he would have looked at his stuff, like, remember some parts of it then, that it isn't his long-term memory? Like, if he did get a study before his next quiz?
If he revisited it, if he used some of those cognitive strategies,
Like the-
then
like
maybe.
this-
Yeah, sure. He could strengthen that memory, that response, that string of neurons, right? And get it out later. Yeah. Or if he embedded it in something he already knew, maybe he could have learned it. Yeah. Is that making sense? Yeah.
Also in the book, it said that working memory could be known as short-term memory.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the
Yeah.
quiz, will you be wording it differently at all?
You mean on the exam?
Yeah, that's what I mean, sorry.
I think I keep it as working.
Okay.
If that, I'll look as I prepare it though, because it could also be short term, same thing. Yeah. So our long term memory here, yeah, holds knowledge for a long time. I want you to think of it as a network of associations. This is the way that we imagine, or the imagery that we use for the long term memory. Okay. I think of it as the Hall of Prophecies in Harry Potter. gonna nerd out on you here. So you see the kids here walking through the Hall of Prophecies. There's all these orbs here. Those are all memories. And you encode it, you save it somewhere, and I wish mine looked like this. And then I go in later and I have to pull out that memory. I have to find it again. Then I bring it back into my working memory and I use it. The problem with the kid on the quiz was that he couldn't find it again. He didn't make those pathways strong enough. He didn't encode it in such a way that he could retrieve it later on. That would be the idea.
My dad says his memory is like a filing cabinet kind of thing, and he's really good at pulling.
Sure, the organization of it, and that increases with age. Okay? Try one more thing for me here. So we're going to do, we've got a few minutes left, 5 minutes. We're going to do one more working memory task here, and it's going to demonstrate this network of associations idea. So it's going to be a ready recall. This time it's just going to be a list of words. I'm going to read off the list of words, and then I'm going to say recall. And I want you to write down all of the words that you can remember, and it doesn't matter what order they're in. Okay? So just write down all the words that you remember from my list. So ready? Rest, snore, sound, tired, bed, comfort, awake, eat, wake, dream, slumber, night, recall. There are 12 words. How many of you remember the word aardvark? No, it wasn't in there.
Okay, I was like, I'm crazy.
No. How many of you remember the word night? How many of you remember the word sleep? I put a question mark in there. Aardvark wasn't in there either, but y'all looked at me like I was crazy. I know. I was fix that, yeah. Tuesday, I already pointed that out.
So, we didn't question you because all these words had to do with like sleeping.
Yeah,
So aardvark had nothing to do with that. So
Right.
that's why.
it's just a simple priming, example of priming. So I primed everything in your long-term memory that had to do with sleep, so sleep got activated. You remembered sleep. I didn't prime anything to do with aardvark. It's not something people normally think about. I don't even know what they look like, honestly.
Interesting thing, I remembered a word that wasn't in there,
What was it?
breakfast.
Yeah, so I mean, I had eat, wake. So for you, maybe these three triggered breakfast.
Yeah.
And you put it down. Yeah, this is the way our long-term memory works. That's what I mean by a network of associations. Okay, so when we activate something in our memory system, we activate it out and it fans out in kind of this spread of activation where similar concepts are activated. Just like if I hit this one, some of these are going to go ahead and go. Right? What does it mean for learning? What should we do as teachers? What's the application? Elaboration. Yes, this is why elaboration works. This is what schema theory is. This is what Piaget taught us. Build on to pre-existing knowledge to schemes. Elaborate. That's where you're going to have to learn it.
Okay?
All right, in your lecture notes, there are some long-term classroom implications. You're going to want to go ahead and take a look at those. And the last piece here on the human memory system is the central executive. And remember, that's just the businessman. So it's the person that directs the flow of information. It's the butler, okay, or the head maid. So in this, what we didn't cover, we covered all the processes here and how they apply to the classroom. We didn't look at that central executive. That's metacognition. That's thinking about thinking. And this is the piece that I want you to make sure you spend a little bit of time with over the weekend when you're preparing for the opportunity. Metacognition. Okay, that's the central executive.
The last one.